Single dad beaten by biker gang protecting lost girl. But she was the daughter of a billionaire, and upon discovery does something that shocks everyone. Rate my story from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The summer afternoon blazed on the asphalt of the sprawling metropolis as the 30-year-old mechanic finished another grueling day at the auto shop in Queens. His hands still bore the dark stains of grease that no soap could completely remove, and sweat mixed with motor oil left his skin with that characteristic scent of someone who earned a living fixing old engines. Even so, his striking features drew attention, a face that could be on magazine covers, but who had chosen to live in the simplicity of someone who knew the value of honest work. Walking through the busy streets towards Times Square, he thought about his 4-year-old son, who was waiting for him at home in their small apartment in Brooklyn. Since the boy's mother had abandoned them 2 years before, claiming she couldn't stand the life of hardship, he had been raising the child alone, dividing himself between long days at the shop and the responsibilities of a single parent. Every penny was counted, every meal planned, but there was never a lack of love in that humble home. It was then that his eyes caught something that made his heart race. Among the indifferent crowd hurrying by, a fragile-looking little girl was crying desperately, lost and scared. She looked only about 2 years old, so delicate was she, but her eyes expressed a fear that went beyond her age. People passed her by as if she were invisible, absorbed in their own problems. No one cared about that child in distress. Without thinking twice, the single dad approached the girl, kneeling down to her height. In a soft voice, he tried to calm her, promising to help her find her parents. The child, between sobs, clung to his grease-stained shirt as if he were her only salvation in that hostile world. The deafening roar of revving engines cut through the air before he could even process what was happening. A biker gang appeared violently in Times Square, surrounding him with their powerful machines. The leader, a burly man with scars on his face, got off his bike with fury in his eyes. "Let go of the girl, scumbag! Did you think no one would see you trying to kidnap her?" the biker shouted as the other gang members approached menacingly. "You're wrong!" "I was just trying to help. She was lost and crying," the mechanic tried to explain, instinctively shielding the child behind his body. But words didn't matter to those men thirsty for violence. The first punch hit his face with brutal force, making him stagger, but he didn't let go of the girl. Even receiving kicks to the ribs and punches that left his face bloodied, he continued to protect the child with his own body, absorbing all the violence directed at her. Dozens of people watched the scene horrified, but no one intervened. Some recorded with their cell phones, others simply looked away and went on their way. The world had become a place where indifference was stronger than compassion. The distant sound of police sirens made the gang quickly disperse, leaving the mechanic lying on the ground with fractured ribs and his face disfigured by the assaults. Even so, his arms still protected the girl, who was crying, scared but unharmed. Paramedics arrived along with the police, taking him to the hospital while the child was taken to a temporary shelter. During 3 days in the hospital, he couldn't stop thinking about her. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those frightened little eyes asking for protection. The physical pain of the fractured ribs was nothing compared to the anguish of not knowing if the girl was okay. When he was discharged from the hospital, the first thing he did was look for the social worker in charge of the case. The middle-aged woman, used to dramatic situations, was surprised by the dedication of that man who could barely walk straight because of the injuries. "Has no one looked for her yet?" he asked, his voice choked with emotion. "Unfortunately, no. We are doing searches, but so far no family has appeared," replied the social worker, observing the expression of deep sadness on the man's battered face. At that moment, something inexplicable happened in his heart, an absolute certainty that he needed to protect that child, even knowing nothing about her origin. Without hesitating, he began the procedures to become the girl's temporary guardian. even knowing the financial difficulties he would face, raising two children alone on a mechanic's salary. What he didn't imagine was that that decision would change his life in a way he could never have foreseen, connecting him to the fate of one of the most powerful women in the country, someone who would move heaven and earth to find her lost daughter. While the mechanic struggled in the hospital hallways on the other side of the city, in the luxurious offices of a mirrored skyscraper, a 30-year-old woman walked desperately back and forth in her presidential suite. Her stunning beauty contrasted with the despair stamped on her face, and her perfectly manicured hands trembled as she held the phone, coordinating search teams that scoured every corner of the metropolis. The businesswoman had built a financial empire that few men could erect. Her investments in stock market shares yielded millions monthly, and her fortune in dollars grew exponentially every quarter. Part of her assets were invested in bitcoins and other assets that multiplied her capital impressively, but at that moment, all her wealth was worth nothing if she couldn't find her daughter. "I want all the security guards on the streets. Offer $1 million reward for any information," she shouted into the phone, her normally controlled voice now filled with panic. "Review all the security cameras in the area. Hire more private detectives. Do whatever it takes." The loss had occurred during a panic attack in the busiest mall in the city. Amidst the crowd, she lost sight of her daughter for a few seconds that seemed like an eternity. When she realized it, the girl had disappeared, as if the earth had opened and swallowed her. Since then, for 3 days, she hadn't slept or eaten properly, mobilizing all her resources to find the child. Her assistants came in and out of the room constantly, bringing negative reports from the searchers. Each "we haven't found anything yet" was like a stab in her already shattered heart. Guilt consumed her. How could a mother lose her own daughter? How could her momentary negligence have caused something so terrible? On the 4th day, finally a call changed everything. One of the hired detectives had tracked down information about a child matching the description, taken to a shelter after an incident in Times Square. The billionaire's heart raced. Her daughter was alive. "She is under the temporary care of a man who volunteered as guardian," explained the detective. "Apparently, he was the one who found her in Times Square and protected her from an assault." The businesswoman's first reaction was of total distrust. What kind of person offers to take care of an unknown child? Surely it was an opportunist who had discovered who she was and intended to blackmail or kidnap her daughter to extort her fortune. She prepared for the worst, gathering her most competent lawyers and a team of security guards to confront the supposed kidnapper. When she arrived on the outskirts of the city for the first time in her life, accompanied by 3 armored cars full of security guards, she mentally prepared for a legal and emotional battle. The difference between her world of luxury and those simple streets was shocking. She had never imagined that there were places so far from her reality of penthouse and elegant offices. But when she arrived at the humble house with a low gate and a small yard, the scene she witnessed left her completely speechless. Her daughter was playing happily in the grassy yard, laughing loudly as she ran after a boy of the same age. It was the first time in days that she had seen the child smile, and that crystal-clear sound of her laughter was like music to her ears, tortured by worry. In the simple kitchen, through the open window, she could see a man preparing lunch. Even from afar, she noticed the purple and swollen marks on his face, obvious signs that he had been brutally beaten. He moved with difficulty, clearly still feeling pain from the assaults, but his gestures were affectionate as he cut vegetables for a homemade soup. "Ma'am, he was beaten by a gang when he tried to protect your daughter," explained the detective in a low voice. "According to witnesses, he used his own body as a shield so she wouldn't get hurt. He spent 3 days in the hospital with fractured ribs. For a few minutes, the most powerful woman in the country was paralyzed on the sidewalk, watching that domestic scene that defied all her expectations. There was a man who didn't know her, who didn't know about her fortune, who had risked his life for her daughter and now took care of her as if she were his own family. When she finally rang the doorbell, the mechanic answered with his shirt stained with flour, clearly in the middle of preparing lunch. Upon seeing her, he immediately knew who she was. The woman's eyes were identical to those of the girl he had been caring for 4 days. "You must be her mother," he said, in a soft voice, without showing any interest in the expensive cars parked on the street, or the obviously expensive clothes she was wearing. "She's fine, don't worry. She's been playing a lot with my son." The simplicity and sincerity of those words touched something deep in the businesswoman's heart. She expected to find a criminal, but came across an angel who had saved her daughter and treated her with paternal love. "Why did you do that?" she asked, trying to contain the emotion in her voice. "Any parent would do the same," he replied, wincing in pain as he moved his injured arm. "She was scared and needed protection. I couldn't just ignore it." At that moment, something began to awaken in the billionaire's heart, a feeling she had buried years ago, since she decided to focus only on business after a series of failed relationships with greedy men. For the first time, she was facing someone who didn't know about her wealth and who had shown pure kindness, expecting nothing in return. Instead of simply taking her daughter away, she heard herself asking if she could stay a little longer to observe how the girl was adapting. What started as a visit of a few minutes extended throughout the afternoon, and she found herself helping to serve the simple lunch, sitting at the small kitchen table, listening to the laughter of the 2 children who had become inseparable. For the first time in years, the woman who commanded a billion-dollar empire felt just human. The days that followed turned into a strange routine that the businesswoman never imagined living. Every morning she cancelled billion-dollar meetings with vague excuses to her confused assistants, exchanged her designer suits for simple clothes bought hastily in popular stores, and drove a modest rental car to the outskirts of the city. Her fortune remained untouched in investments and investment funds, but she discovered an inexplicable pleasure in living as an ordinary person. In the mechanic's humble house, she learned things that no elite university or administration course had taught: how to prepare a meal with cheap but nutritious ingredients, how to fix a broken toy with creativity, how to find joy in simple things. Her hands, accustomed only to signing millionaire contracts, now got dirty washing dishes and sweeping the small yard. The single dad, in turn, felt increasingly attracted to that mysterious woman who had appeared in his life as an unexpected gift. She had introduced herself only as the girl's mother, without revealing her last name or profession, and he respected that reserve. For him, she was simply the most fascinating woman he had ever met, intelligent, caring for the children, and surprisingly skilled in adapting to his simple world. For 2 weeks, they built a delicate intimacy. They talked for hours while the children slept, sharing childhood stories, frustrated dreams, and future hopes. She lied about some details. She said she worked in an accounting office, that she lived in a small apartment, that she also struggled to pay the bills, but the feelings that blossomed between them were absolutely true. The tension between them grew day after day. Looks that lasted a few seconds longer than necessary, hands that touched accidentally while serving dinner, conversations in low voices on the small living room sofa that left them dangerously close. He felt her delicate perfume mixed with the smell of home. She perceived his gentle strength when he helped the children, and both fought against an attraction that seemed inevitable. It was on a rainy Friday night that they almost gave in completely. The children had slept early, tired of playing all day, and they were alone in the dark room, only with the soft light of the television illuminating their faces. The conversation died naturally, replaced by a silence charged with desire. When she leaned over to pick up the cup of tea on the low table, he gently held her wrist, and for an infinite moment their eyes met with an intensity that left them breathless. "We can't," she whispered, more to herself than to him, but without letting go of his hand. "Why not?" he asked, bringing his face closer to hers, feeling her accelerated breathing. She almost told the truth at that moment, almost revealed who she really was and why that relationship would be impossible. But the phone rang, breaking the spell, and she quickly moved away, feigning normality while answering an urgent call from her lawyers about a corporate merger. The first sign that her farce was in danger came on a Monday morning. A middle-aged man, well-dressed but with a sinister look, appeared at the auto shop where the mechanic worked. A former employee of the billionaire's company, fired for corruption 6 months earlier, he had spent weeks investigating his former boss's life, seeking a way to avenge the humiliating dismissal. "Interesting how the richest woman in the country likes to play at being poor," he said, showing photos secretly taken of her entering and leaving the house on the outskirts. "I imagine how much the gossip magazines would pay for this story, don't you think?" The mechanic looked at the photos without understanding. In them, the woman he knew as a simple office worker was getting out of a limousine, wearing very expensive clothes, surrounded by security guards. In another photo, she was signing documents at a luxurious meeting table, clearly presiding over some important business board. She didn't tell you who she really is? The owner of an empire worth billions? The woman whose assets in stocks grow millions every month? Laughed the blackmailer maliciously. How romantic, a billionaire playing Cinderella in reverse. The revelation was like a punch to his still sensitive stomach from his poorly healed ribs. Everything made sense now. Her hands too soft for someone who worked, the knowledge about expensive wines that she had shown unintentionally, the ease with which she talked about investments when she thought he wasn't paying attention. "What do you want?" he asked, trying to control the anger and disappointment that were growing in his chest. "Simple. You're going to help me blackmail her, or I'll expose everything in the tabloids. Imagine the scandal. Billionaire has fun deceiving poor mechanic. What a humiliation it would be for both of you," threatened the man, leaving a card with his phone number. "You have 2 days to decide." That night, when she arrived as always, bringing sweets for the children and smiling, with that naturalness that he now knew was false, he could barely look into her eyes. During dinner, he observed every detail that had previously gone unnoticed. Her refined posture, the elegant way she held her silverware, small gestures that betrayed an elite education. "Did something happen?" she asked, noticing his unusual coldness. "Nothing important," he lied, but inside he felt as if he had been used, as if all that special connection he thought existed between them was just a cruel game for her to have fun. After the children went to sleep, he gathered the courage to confront her. But when he opened his mouth to speak, she surprised him by approaching him on the sofa, placing her hand on his chest with an intimacy that made his heart race despite the hurt. "I need to tell you something important," she whispered, and for a moment he thought he would finally receive the truth. But at that exact moment the doorbell rang insistently. Outside, threatening voices shouted his name, demanding that he come out. They were the blackmailer's security guards who had lost patience with the 2-day deadline he had given. Looking through the window, he saw 3 large men surrounding his house, and his blood ran cold as he realized that the children were in danger because of that situation that he did not fully understand. The woman he loved had brought this problem into his life, and now he no longer knew who to trust or how to protect his family. The tension in the small room was palpable when the shouts outside intensified. The businesswoman paled upon hearing the men's threats, immediately recognizing the voice of the former employee she had fired months before. Her farce was crumbling in the worst possible way, putting at risk not only her reputation, but the safety of the children sleeping in the next room. "I can explain everything," she said, her voice trembling, but the mechanic was already heading to the children's room, carrying his son in his arms and signaling for her to pick up the girl. "Explanations later. "Now we need to protect the children," he replied, his voice controlled despite the fury that burned in his eyes. Through the back window, they managed to leave the house without being seen, walking through the dark alleys of the outskirts until they reached the house of a trusted neighbor. There, with the children safe and sleeping again, the moment of truth that she feared so much finally arrived. "Who are you really?" he asked, crossing his arms and staring at her with a mixture of disappointment and anger that broke her heart. With tears running down her face, she revealed everything. Her real identity, her billion-dollar fortune built through strategic investments, how her company controlled assets worth more than small nations, and mainly, why she had lied about who she was. With each word, he saw the disappointment grow in the eyes of the man she had learned to love. "Do you see me as a social experiment? A temporary fun to feel special?" he asked, the pain evident in his voice. "No, you don't understand," she cried, trying to approach him. "For the first time in my life, someone loved me for who I really am, not for my money. I couldn't risk losing that. But you still lost, didn't you? Because it was all based on a lie." The confrontation was interrupted by the arrival of more cars on the street. The blackmailer had discovered where they were and had brought reinforcements, but this time the billionaire was no longer pretending to be vulnerable. With a single call, she mobilized her own security team, lawyers, and private investigators. During the investigation that followed, a shocking discovery came to light. The biker gang attack had not been random. The blackmailer was the brother of the gang leader, and together they had planned to kidnap the girl in Times Square to extort the billionaire mother. The brutal beating of the mechanic had happened because he had interfered with the plan, protecting the child when he should have simply walked by like everyone else. "They had been following you for weeks," the investigator explained. "The kidnapping was supposed to happen on that specific day at that location. When you interfered, they improvised the assault to try to recover the girl." The revelation changed everything. The mechanic understood that he had not been a victim of circumstances, but a hero whom fate had placed in the right place to save not only the daughter of the woman he loved, but to save her own ability to love again. In the days that followed, with the criminals arrested and the threat eliminated, they tried to rebuild the shattered trust. She made a radical decision that shocked the financial world. She publicly announced that she would donate a significant portion of her fortune to funds that supported families in situations of social vulnerability, keeping only enough to live comfortably, but no longer in the excessive luxury of before. "It's not a marketing ploy," she told skeptical journalists. "It's a real change of priorities. I discovered that true wealth is not in financial investments, but in genuine human connections." To prove her sincerity to the man she loved, she started working at his auto shop 3 times a week, learning to get her hands dirty with real grease, discovering the pleasure of fixing broken things instead of just buying new ones. Her former business colleagues were scandalized, but she had never felt more complete. Reconciliation was slow and painful. He needed to learn to trust again, and she needed to prove that her feelings were real, not a rich woman's bored whim. For 4 months, they rebuilt their relationship on a more solid foundation, facing together the attacks of the tabloid press that tried to turn their love story into a scandal. The sexual tension that had always existed between them finally found expression on a rainy night, 6 months after the first lie had been revealed. This time, when they kissed on the small living room sofa, there were no secrets between them, only the naked truth of 2 hearts that had fought against all odds to find each other. The children, who had become siblings at heart during all that turmoil, were the first to realize that their parents had finally worked things out. The pure joy of the 2 children playing together in the yard of the simple house became the symbol that true love could overcome any social or financial barrier. The wedding took place exactly 1 year after the day he had saved her in Times Square. The ceremony was held in the small yard where it had all begun, decorated only with flowers from the garden she had learned to cultivate. There was no list of VIP guests or elaborate ceremonial, only close family, neighbors who had become family, and the two children as ring-bearers, carrying simple rings that symbolized a love that had survived lies, blackmail, and prejudice. When she said "I do" before the small improvised altar, wearing a simple white dress that cost less than one of her old designer handbags, the mechanic knew he had found his true wealth. And when he slipped the ring on her finger, promising to love her in wealth and in poverty, she understood that she had discovered the most profitable investment of her life, betting on true love. Years later, sitting on the porch of the house they renovated together, watching the children play in the same yard where fate had united them, they knew they had conquered something more valuable than any fortune, a family built on truth, sacrifice, and unconditional love. The difference between their worlds had become the force that kept them together, proving that the heart does not recognize social classes when it finds its other half. If you liked this wonderful story, please comment. Giving a score from 0 to 10, your opinion is very important. And if you love beautiful stories, subscribe to my channel. I promise to make your day better with my videos.